All right, guys, in this video, we're going to talk about how to calculate the standardized test statistic and p-value for a test about a difference of population proportions. So if the conditions are met, we can proceed with the calculations to do the tests of the null and alternative. Um, we need to standardize the difference of sample proportions to get a z statistic. So if we suppose the conditions are met to perform this test, we calculate z as the difference in sample proportions minus zero. The reason it's minus zero is because we're assuming that the null is true, in which case there would be no difference, divided by the standard error of the statistic, which in this case is p, or the combined proportion, excuse me, times 1 minus the combined proportion times 1 over the first sample size plus 1 over the second sample size. Okay, remember PC is the pooled data, so it's the number of successes from both samples divided by the sample size of both samples added together. And then we find the p-value by calculating the probability of getting that z statistic, that large or larger, in the direction specified by the alternative hypothesis in the normal distribution. Now, again, the specific formula for the standardized test statistic for a difference in population proportions, that's not going to be included on the formula sheet. However, the general formula is, and the standard error of the difference in a sample proportion is going to be also on the AP exam formula sheet. So while they won't tell you which formula to use exactly, the formulas will be there, and you have to know how to use and when to use each one. Okay, so we're back to that McDonald's example with Wendy's and drive-throughs. So we want to do a couple things here. We want to explain why the sample result gives some evidence for the alternative hypothesis. All right, so for that, we just have to look at the sample difference, or the observed difference, which the observed difference in the sample proportion is p hat for McDonald's minus the p hat for Wendy's. We calculate those proportions, subtract them, and you get 0.059. Small value, but that does give some evidence in favor of the alternative hypothesis that the difference is not zero, because 0.059 is not equal to zero. That doesn't answer the question of whether or not that is convincing evidence, and that's why we have to do the full hypothesis test. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is calculate the standardized test statistic and p-value. So the first thing we're going to do is calculate the combined proportion. So you take the number of successes in each sample, add those together, divided by the sum of the sample sizes, and you get 0.882. We did that previously in a previous step. Then from that, we're going to calculate the value of z, which, so z equals the difference in proportions minus zero, remember, because we're assuming that there is no difference in proportions, divided by the square root of, or the standard error of the statistic, and you get 1.641. Okay, so from that, we can calculate the p-value. Now, we could do that one of two ways. We could calculate it using table A, or the calculator. Now, for the calculator, you'd type in, you'd use the normal CDF, lower and upper. So lower is 1.641, upper is 1,000, mean and standard deviation 0 and 1. But we have to multiply it by 2 because this is a two-tailed test, because we're looking for a difference in either direction. If we use table A, we would find 1.64 on the table. That would give us 0.9495. And remember, that is the positive z-score, so that'd be the area to the left of that, which is not what we're looking for. We're looking for the area above that, so we subtract it from 1, And then that would just give us the upper tail's probability. So we multiply it by 2 again to get the lower tail probability. So what conclusion would we make at the significance level of 0.05? Well, in this case, because the p-value of 0.1008 is greater than our significance level, we would fail to reject the null. There is not convincing evidence of a difference in the population proportions of accurate drive-through orders at McDonald's and Wendy's. So another thing that we could look at here is this this graph right here. Now this graph is the normal distribution, okay, um, for the difference in proportions. And when we were doing the two-tailed test, we were basically getting the probability of a result in either of these two tails, which is about a 10% probability. Again, that's low, but it's not low enough to rule out variation due to sampling. Okie dokie. Now, what I want to look at is to show you how to do the significance test for comparing two proportions when the null hypothesis is no difference on, or has no difference, or is no difference, yeah, on the calculator. So we're going to go stat over to tests and then down to two proportion z-test, which is number 6. So you put your values in. So in this case, the number of successes for sample 1 was 145, the sample size 159. I already put these in, save time. Sample 2 successes were 139, sample size 136. You have to pick the direction of the alternative. In this case, it was in either direction, so not equal. So then we hit go down to calculate, hit enter. And what this is going to give you is the z value, the p value, as well as the proportion for 1, the proportion for 2, and the pooled proportion right here. Okay, so couple notes, the value of the test statistics and p-value from technology might differ slightly from the values calculated by hand because of rounding. The calculator also gives you the value of the combined sample proportion, but it uses the symbol p hat instead of p. So right here, this is the combined proportion. Okay, this is proportion for sample 1, proportion for sample 2, combined proportion. Now, if we had selected the draw option, we could see a picture of the standard normal distribution with the shaded area and the value of the standardized test statistic and p-value. So the formula for the two sample z test often leads to calculation errors by students. So we're going to recommend using the calculator to perform the two proportion z test on the AP Stats exam. But if you're using the calculator, make sure to include all this 4 steps. So the state, plan, and do, and then conclude when you're doing a significance test. Make sure you also report the standardized test statistic, the z-score, and the p-value in the do step. All right, guys, that's it for this one. Hope that was helpful. Take care.